pleasant good afternoon, everyone. Well, a good evening, actually, and happy International Youth Day 2015. It's a week after the officially recognized day, but we are still in celebratory mode. We know youth are the backbone of our nations. We are the vibrant bunch who are always pushing for great works, great activities, and it's certainly an exciting feeling and a momentous occasion to be here with you all. A warm welcome to the esteemed panel of youth workers who, true to your dedication of aggressively mobilizing around the youth agenda, you have taken the progressive step to join hands with the Volunteer Center of Trinidad and Tobago on our first ever VChat, a very exciting step indeed. Now, for those who are not familiar with the Volunteer Center of Trinidad and Tobago, at VCTT, our mission is to create and engender a culture of active citizenship, of citizens who understand the mechanisms and means in which we can get involved in, and more so we can get involved in the process of addressing the issues which affect us as a people. Right now, true to technology, there are some challenges. So some of the panelists who were supposed to be here today, they are attempting to get on, but technology being what it may. But hopefully, as we continue with the VChat, they will be able to join us. Now, as we start and kick things off, acknowledgement must be given to, first and foremost, Mr. Henry Charles, who is the former Director of Youth Affairs for the Commonwealth Youth Secretariat. We also have on board Mr. Noel Hines, who is the representative of the Guyana National Youth Council and Youth Advocate. So, gentlemen, a warm welcome. Thank you very much for being here with us this evening. In addition, we have Mr. Maurice Burke, who is the Director of International Relations at VCTT. He will be moderating this event for us, and actually, this VChat was the brainchild of Mr. Maurice Burke, so kudos to Maurice for such a progressive step forward. Right. Now, just to kick things off a bit, I thought it would be important to speak a bit in terms of why a VChat. We understand the power of technology, the reach of technology, and I think it's very interesting that we don't have to leave our space to have such critical discussions around the issues that are affecting us as youth. VCTT is a youth-led organization, so the synergy and the direct and organic line in which such a conversation and discussion around youth and youth being involved in the different issues that affect us, that was definitely a natural course of action for us. So time is short, so let's look to get things on the road. I'd like to pass the baton over to Mr. Maurice Burke, who will soon be coming on to moderate and get the discussions going. Good. All right. So, Mr. Charles, are you there? All right. Good. So, just to give some more information about VCTT and what we do while we wait for Maurice to come on board, we're still struggling with some technology issues here. The mission of VCTT, again, is to align volunteers with community-based projects, NGOs, charities. So we're essentially a hub for matching volunteers and initiatives that exist in the community. In order to volunteer, it's a very easy process. The first thing that a volunteer can do is visit our website, www.vctt.org, where they can get full details about registering to be a volunteer. But in addition to that, they can also get details about all of the partner organizations that VCTT has partnered with and organizations that are seeking volunteer opportunities. We are always seeking avenues in which we can, really enrich the discussions around volunteerism and how we take volunteerism to another level in Trinidad and Tobago. Volunteerism is by no means a new concept. Volunteerism has been around for many years. Many of us have been involved in various activities, whether it be via our churches, volunteering on weekends, if you participate in a beach cleanup or whatever it is. Volunteerism is not a new concept, but we do recognize the fact that persons are really seeking that neutral space in which they can get involved and make a difference. Youth have a critical and a powerful role to play within that. And again, we see this opportunity of a VChat as a strong and powerful platform in which we can begin evolving the discussions and seeing how we can translate discussion into actions. Because I mean, we're a very opinionated people. We have lots of ideas about solutions, but how do we begin to translate those ideas into actions that actually address and effect true sustainable change? So to kick things off, I'll pass it on to Maurice Burke, who's ready to come on board. I'm definitely looking forward to the discussions. Have a fantastic evening, everyone, and see you next time.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a beautiful Tuesday evening, the beautiful Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And while I'm trying to change my name here from Giselle Mendes to Maurice Burke, I want to say a great welcome to every one of you who is online and looking at our first VChat. This was something that, you know, in VCTT we are looking for ways to influence the discussion on what's happening around the world in volunteer work and service work. And of course, being that I am so very much in love with my origin, which is youth work, where would we start but with young people and youth work in the Caribbean region? So putting this together, I have to admit, it was an amazing task. And it continues to be an amazing task. Because we're trying to work with the technology, we've had some issues. So as an example, one of our presenters had an issue with the internet connection. That's Ms. Tioka Dove. So she is right now working hard at trying to get online. And then we have another presenter who also had some internet issues. But you know what? The show must go on. So it is with no further ado that I begin to bring my presenters into the Hangout. I just brought in Mr. Henry Charles, and he, as Giselle was saying, he's a stalwart in youth work in the Caribbean. You know, if you have been with a youth council, or you've been a youth ambassador, or in a youth club that, you know, has been doing any kind of work on a national scale, you definitely would have met Henry Charles. I won't go too much into it because it might sound like I'm giving you the love letter, and someone told me once that I was giving the love letter. But really and truly, it's an amazing opportunity to be able to work with this gentleman. I'm also bringing in Miss Terry-Ann Gilbert Roberts, and she is the chairperson of the youth round the table at SALISA's, that's the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies at the UWI. I'm saying Miss, it shouldn't be Miss, it's Dr. Terry-Ann Gilbert Roberts. And I'm bringing in another gentleman who got some rave reviews as he was being introduced, and that is Mr. Norwell Hines. Norwell got really excellent reviews when he was being recommended by the president of the Guyana National Youth Council for the work that he has done. And I took the opportunity, Norwell, to macro some of your Facebook photos, and from the looks of things, you know, exactly what I've heard is exactly what you've been doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, the format of what we're going with today is going to be very simple. Firstly, we're going to allow our presenters just about 5 minutes where they'd be able to give some introductory words, after which we're going to go straight into the discussion. Now, there are a couple of swings that I want to do with this. Firstly, I don't think that something like this is important. We shouldn't do something like this without giving the opportunity for persons on the internet to give us feedback. So we have a beautiful team of people. I'm saying beautiful team maybe because I'm a part, I don't know. We have a team of beautiful people from the Volunteer Center who are right now going to be monitoring our social media on Facebook, on Twitter, etc. And you can use the hashtag VChat. Now we prefer if you're using Facebook, because if you're at our VChat page, you'll see that you can actually tweet and it's going to come up on the page there. They'll be monitoring those networks to see what comments and questions are coming in. So you can feel free at any time to chime in with your questions or your comments. And of course, let people know that the first VChat is very much on the way. All right, excellent. So we're going to start off with seniority and age. Yes, we're going to start off with Mr. Charles. Mr. Charles, we're going to give you, here's your 5 minutes to give us an introduction. Mr. Charles.
Well, yeah, good evening, everyone. And let me just start by recognizing my colleagues here, Noel, Terian, your team with the VCTT in terms of Giselle, Maurice, yourself, and to say that is a welcome initiative. In fact, it is heartening for somebody who has labored in the vineyard for a number of years. It is heartening to see some of the developments that are taking place in 2015 with respect to this initiative by yourself, an initiative that is taking place next month, which Terian is taking the lead in terms of the first regional academic conference on youth development. I say that also to indicate that 2015 is turning out to be somewhat of a pivotal year for youth development globally, regionally, although sometimes I think many of us involved in the movement may not necessarily recognize that. This year, 2015, marks 70 years since the first global of youth advocates and youth leaders in November 10th, 1945. Yeah? It is also, this year is also, I think it's 50 years, is it? 50 years since the first United Nations resolution specifically addressing the question of youth empowerment in 1965, if my maths is right, right? This year, 2015, also marks 30th anniversary of the first International Year of the Youth, as well as the 20th anniversary of the World Program of Action for Youth Empowerment. So 2015 is a very pivotal year, and of course, this is the year that, led by Terian and a number of us, we have decided, well, look, we're having this first regional conference on youth development. It is critical because we have spoken a lot about the significant role that young people should play, and of course in the Caribbean context that young people has actually played in terms of not just the development, but essentially transformation of our societies. Oftentimes, even when we ourselves lament the fact that opportunities are not always provided for young people, we sometimes forget that many of the major social movements, whether they were cultural in nature, political in nature, or economic, were led sometimes and oftentimes driven, or young people became the soul of those movements. The early movements, the early riots to transform the social and political conditions in the post-emancipation period were young people's involvement. And oftentimes, I say to give us a little heart, because sometimes when you focus a lot on some of the challenges that we face now, we keep forgetting that the youth movement, that young people have made those significant contributions in terms of transforming our social, political, economic landscapes in the region. Another area I think that we need to focus on as we go further, perhaps in the discussion today, is the question of participation. And that, of course, we lament the fact that much of the opportunities or the frameworks of participation for young people seem to be, the official ones seem to be ad hoc in nature and generally tokenistic, where people just, like, it's like a fad. They give you the opportunity. And I raise it because I'm also concerned that sometimes young people, young leaders themselves seem carried away and get caught up in the trappings of some of those supposed opportunities. I have concerns that, I mean, in some countries, I see what is emerging. I think sometimes, you know, you see whereas young people need to protect and defend the right to belong to a particular political organization or the other. Sometimes you get the sense that they allow their political partisanship to transcend the broader responsibility of protecting and defending the rights, the economic and political rights of young people as a demographic group. These are concerns. There's also the participation from the standpoint of oftentimes we focus on saying what the state is not doing, what the established institutions are not doing. I've been reflecting the last couple of days and say I must bring it up in this discussion that we need to pay attention in terms of young people themselves providing opportunities for young people to participate. Many of the existing structures that are youth structures have undertaken, on my humble observation, what I call a very elitist approach. And so we continue to provide opportunities and we continue to recognize and herald those young persons who have done very well, who have participated in international fora, regional fora, and that thing, and they have done well. Many of them have learned all of the tricks of the game. They know the little diplomatic skills. They have learned some of the political skills. But I am worried that the grassroots mass of young people are seemingly isolated, and they themselves are beginning to see some of those youth structures that are supposed to be representing them as being part of the problem rather than being part of the solution. And so I think as we reflect, like I say, 70 years since the first International Youth Forum, and we begin to that major step of trying to take a more evidence-based, a more informed approach to youth development through the conference next month, the Solicits, the 50-50 conference next month. I think we need to also begin to look at that whole thing, the dynamics within the youth organization. How are young people allowing young people themselves to participate? Because that might very well be a contributing factor in terms of one of the concerns of people moving away from volunteerism, of people not participating in the club organizations, because the clubs and some youth councils have forgotten that even while they need to have a proper leadership and management structures, that they are movements. So I think we have lost the movement aspect of the character, and we have moved into the institutional elitist aspect of the culture, and we are looking for when cometh the next plane ticket, rather than looking for how are we going to mobilize young people on the ground to transform our communities and societies. That is perhaps what I want to say by beginning. And, it's not intended to offend any listener, but really to get people thinking and to see how we go forward. Sorry.
No, why apologize? I think...
I just... Sorry.
Excellent words. I like those words, and I want to ask my team to take that quote. I want to tweet that quote. Whether the next plane ticket for youth leaders. And the reason why I'm going with it is because, I've been one of those young people who has traveled. And I remember always getting the question from friends and other colleagues, you guys are always traveling, what are you doing at home? And while, I know that I did work at home. I'm still an officer in the Trinidad and Tobago Cadet Force, among other things. That's a question that's always asked, and it's even asked among the circles of the people who travel. And some of the topics that he brought up regarding, of course, the grassroots aspect of youth work. What are we doing here, and how do we operate, and how do we integrate other young people who are part of the process? And those are some excellent questions. We're starting to whet the appetites here, everyone. We're starting to whet the appetites. I need to not go too Trini because I'm going to lose some people. I have someone in the US who told me to slow down just now. I would now like to introduce, coming from the beautiful island of Jamaica, Dr. Terry Ann Gilbert Roberts, and she's here as, there's so much I can say about her. A few years ago, I had the ability not only of being on a panel, which she moderated, but also listening to her speak at my first conference at Salisa's at UE in Mona. And I don't think there's much that I can say. She came through the youth movement, you should know. She was a CARICOM youth ambassador to Jamaica, and has now risen through the academic circles and the academic networks. Perhaps a professorship sometime in the near future for her, I don't know. But ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Ms. Terry-Ann Gilbert Roberts to speak with you. See if I have her. Terry-Ann, can you, Dr. Roberts, can you just give me a hello? Let's make sure everyone is hearing you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. So you got your 5 minutes.
Great. Thanks. Greetings to everyone. Maurice and the VCTT team, thanks so much for inviting me. Norwell, Henry, good to see you both. I'm looking forward to seeing you in another month. This is such a timely discussion because not only are we, we've just celebrated International Youth Day with a big buzz around civic engagement and so on, and we have the upcoming conference. But I think it's a way in which we can begin a discussion about what stories we tell. There are the diversity of stories that exist around the world. There are the stories of those young people, as Henry highlighted, who are a part of the sort of youth development elite, who have opportunities to participate in formal structures and so on. And there's a debate that has to take place, I think, about the effectiveness of some of those structures, the performance of the young people who participate, their connectedness to other young people. But there are also other stories, I think, of ways in which young people contribute, they influence others, but they're not plugged into the formal networks, which means that we never hear those stories. And so it means that we end up with a sort of dichotomy of two existences for young people. Either you're the elite who's doing very, very well, everybody knows who you are, you're the president of this youth association or this youth organization, and everybody knows who you are, or you are the young person, the young woman who is considered a delinquent, a juvenile delinquent, or in conflict with the law, wherever she is, and making a negative contribution to society. And I think there's a lot of in-between stories that we don't tell. We don't talk about the young people who are quietly starting movements of voluntary work, whether it's feeding the homeless, clothing the homeless, organizing homework programs for other young people, and changing the way in which we work, the way in which we move, and so on. And so I think when we talk about how young people participate, and this is one of the things we want to talk about in the conference coming up in September, we want to understand not only just generically how young people participate, but who are the youth that we talk about. When we say youth, are we just talking about an age bracket? Or are we talking about specific things? We have specific connotations in our mind. When we say a youth, we're often not thinking about the young professional who might be an academic, who might be an NGO worker, who might be an engineer, who might be a medical doctor. These are all young people and they're contributing. But when they're contributing in a positive way, they're not considered to be a youth. A youth, largely for many people, is somebody who is a bit of an amateur, who requires constant supervision from an adult, who perhaps is being involved in some sort of negative, criminal activity, or that's a youth. And so I think that one of the things that we can do as young people, those who are involved in youth work, youth development work, is to begin to tell a diversity of stories. We have to tell the bad, but we also have to tell the good, and we have to tell the in-between, the things that we don't quite understand yet, but we have to begin to document the modes of youth participation rather than the models. The models that exist is either the good elitist or the bad criminal. In between those, we have several modes of participation that we need to document because it helps us to write the history of youth. As Henry said, we have this youth movement that has sort of been written out of history. There's this long history of young people participating that hasn't really been acknowledged if you think about it. So we need to start documenting that. So it helps to rewrite the history. But secondly, the positive stories, help other young people who are perhaps not doing as well to see what others are doing and to say, well, I can do something, no matter how small, big, how insurmountable it might seem. So these are some of the things that I would like us to talk about. What we mean by youth, what we consider to be youth contribution or civic engagement, what we consider to be a youth structure, and what we consider to mean impactful or being impactful in the world today. So I'll stop there for now and let our other panelists make their contributions.
Okay, so I'm really enjoying the way that this discussion is going. One of the things that we definitely picked up in the room here was looking at the modes and the models of youth participation. What are the modes and models? And that's actually something that struck me as being very strong, because of course we have to always be wary of when we speak about youth participation, what are we speaking of? And it's similar with youth leadership and in so many different aspects of young people. What are we really speaking of? And that's what happens when you bring an academic into the room. They are going to change the way that you think, and they're going to influence the way that you do things that you usually do. Not to mention the one that I absolutely found a challenge in my undergraduate studies. They're also going to challenge every single thing that you say, and cause you to, of course, think differently. So it was a pleasure hearing those introductory words from Dr. Gilbert Roberts. I love saying it. And now let's introduce another person, a young, dynamic gentleman. When he came in earlier, I ended up stopping in to the hangout when they were doing the test. And he had this bright smile on his face. And I asked, said, why are you smiling like that? He said, oh, I suspect that this is going to be saved online for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. So I want to make a good, what was the word? I need to give a good show for myself. So, of course, having an excellent show for himself, we have a dynamic young man from Guyana, Mr. Noel Hines. And Noel is also, I should say, he's also, aside from representing the Guyana National Youth Council, he himself is the head of his own organization. Do I have it right? GuyWithNet, from Guyana. And he's going to correct me on that pronunciation because I suspect that I have it wrong. I guess that's a Trini in me. But let's introduce a young gentleman with a lot to say, Mr. Noel Hines.
Thanks, Maurice. And of course, I'm very happy to be on this. I would say in Guyana, we like to say distinguished panel, including Mr. Henry Charles. I would like to say Professor Henry Charles and Dr. Gilbert, who I've been meeting more virtually in relation to the conference upcoming in Jamaica. I want to thank you, first of all, for inviting me to participate and to represent the National Youth Council and GuyWithNet, which is an organization, in fact, that I started in and not founded, but I started in it. The founder was a man by the name of Trevor Ben, and it was founded around 1999. And I was 13 years old when I started in that organization, a volunteer organization, and in a project called Youth Can Move the World. Now that is significant, and I want to start there for my introductory 5 minutes. Youth can move the world. I am reminded that my own history in my own country, here in Guyana, our political movement and our independence movement was led by young people. In fact, my good friend Dr. Melissa Eiffel reminds us about that. She's spoken about it. The Honorable Dr. Chedi Jagan was in his 20s when he entered into the movement. Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, our first executive president, was in his 20s. And of course, an icon for me, UC Quayano, was also in his 20s. And these were the founders and the architects of our independence movement. Many in the Caribbean, especially UWI folks, will know, of course, about Dr. Walter Rodney. Dr. Walter Rodney, a Guyanese scholar of notoriety around the world, he got his PhD at the age of 24, and he was also a significant mover, not only in the movement in Guyana, but in the Caribbean and in the African countries, particularly Tanzania. It is therefore important, I think, starting off, to acknowledge that youth, I guess by virtue, and I know Professor Charles already started to say it, by virtue of being youth, there's a certain something about being youth that changes spaces, that confronts the dominant worldview and reconstructs in its place a worldview which is responsive to the experience of the young person. In fact, I was reading something that said that there are two types of people in the world, the natives and the immigrants. And if you're under 30, you're a native. If you're over 30, you're an immigrant. I am soon approaching that immigrant status. Native, because you are living in a world such as this one, the technology world, feeling it, utilizing it, interacting with it, creating it. And that folks like myself approaching 30 and getting older are learning to adapt to that constantly changing world. So I think that from a grounded place, it's to recognize that as young people, by the very fact that we are young, that we are confronting structures and seeking to reconstruct structures. I also want to examine, I think, the element of power and the relationship that power plays in the way we interact as individuals. Young people, yes, but even not young people. And I think that what has happened is that we have erected the concept of the organization to replace the individual as the center of power. And in a sense, we have sort of given up the individual power for this notion of collective civil society, organizational power. And how do we return to the grassroots youth, even through structural mechanisms, that capacity for self-advocacy, for moving an agenda in response to self-interest, and to defining self-interest in terms of one's grounded values, one's real experiences, one's real challenges in the environment in which you live. So I would like to begin by contributing here to the conversation that increasingly we're beginning to see the need for reintroducing the notion of movements. Movements that are built up across the diversity of youth, but bounded and bonded by a notion of solidarity. A solidarity across the youth natives of the world. And I think that that is where I will start off for now.
All right, so we are actually starting off on a real high. I loved that Noel spoke about the concept of movement. And the concept of movement is something that I personally feel affected by. It's the difference between people coming together and doing something. It's all well structured without that passion, as opposed to, and I suspect I'm going to be corrected here because, of course, my original training was in engineering, so I'm not a sociologist, but I think that whole concept of the grassroots and those people who have that heart that are pushing something, as opposed to that head thing that is saying that that's where we should be going. And I'm opening up the microphones now because I want everyone to tell me, am I going correct as far as my definition of movement there?
Well, the movement thing, which I think Noel was thinking about, and which I was trying to refer to earlier, I think, yes, it's a whole that is made up of different parts. Of course, now they are if you use the engineering thing, you talk about what might be the central cog, okay? But then one cannot then, because there's a central cog, decide that is it, and then forget the other cogs, because the central cog becomes insignificant if the other cogs are taken out from the equation. Are you trying to use your engineering perspective? But essentially, it is about the structure, the institution has a leadership and all of.
Oh, I just did something wrong. Mr. Charles, I think
Henry.
I think Maurice and the technology. I just lost you there for a second. Okay, I got you back.
Yeah, it is about understanding what is the purpose, and I think the point. There's a few things. The point that Noel made in terms of power. That's another thing that we go on with that discussion. I'm happy that Noel raised that because the thing I keep talking about a lot. We go on this discussion all of the time about the youth development, the youth empowerment, what we should be doing, what we should not be doing. And I'm not about us here. I think we've had that discussion. But people who are into the youth development fraternity talk about youth development and talk about those things. And they shy away from those real issues of the question of power. Because the extent to which youth participation, for instance, will be embraced and will be detokenized in a community is the extent to which there is a reconfiguration of the power relationships and the power structure in the society is reconfigured. You know, as long as we remain with those existing power relationships, okay, where a certain sector or certain class or certain demographic groups have dominant in terms of the power, then we just be talking about youth participation and youth empowerment until thy kingdom come and not accomplish it. And so if you're talking about power, you then have to that should give you the understanding that the only way that power has been redistributed in our history, in the history of humankind, is when there is a mass movement against power.
I like where you're going with that. Dr. Gilbert Roberts. I want to say Terry-Ann so much because I want to be.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, yes, you could say Terry-Ann, Henry, anything. Don't feel no way, man.
Those two letters, I'll tell you, those two letters are both intimidating and endearing at the same time. But
Not at all. We're all friends here, friends and colleagues here.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
in this little movement that is burgeoning at the moment.
Yeah.
How do you
all laborers in the vineyard. That's what we are.
Well, Terry, I wanted to ask, you know, from the aspect of someone who has come through that vineyard and has now moved into a new sector, and how do you think that they're really impacting our, I mean, so, you know, we were speaking just now about movement and the whole concept of what one spoken word artist I heard called the juvenile bourgeoisie, you know, and I heard about the youth elite, etc. How do you really feel? How they're really impacting this world, youth structures and youth organizations? I mean, both positively and negatively. How do you view it?
Well, I view it largely in a positive way, although I acknowledge that there are some negative contributions, of course, and I prefer to use words like influence and contribution rather than impact, because it depends on the audience we're speaking to. Some people who are, you know, technical managerial people, when they speak of impact, they tend to think of a longer-term change in the world. Whereas what I have been observing, and you know, from my own experience and so on, that young people sometimes, although they can develop innovations that really change drastically the world in which we live. You know, people who have developed new software, computer software, and so on, change the way we work, the way we communicate with friends and family quite quickly. But in many ways, the majority of young people are actually making small, incremental changes, touching life by life, small changes within a community setting. It's very positive. One of the things that I've been doing over the last 3 years or so is having a set of conversations with young leaders These are young people who might fall into the category of the elitist group, or they might be young entrepreneurs, but they're regarded as young people who are considered to have done very well. And what I do in these discussions, I try to learn more about them, their background, and what it is that they actually do, their modes of participation. What's interesting is that in addition to mentioning, their role in terms of position on a particular youth organization or network, they might say, I'm the president of such and such, or I'm the treasurer of this organization, and so on, and this organization does X. Many of these young people are also doing other things that don't fall on their CV, that they rarely ever talk about, because they're doing something maybe in their church or in their community. They give back to the other young people in their communities. They stay with them after school and doing a wide range of things. So what I see happening is that young people are influencing the world in a very multidimensional and multi-sectoral fashion, which I think is something very new. Previously, when we think about civic engagement, for example, your parents would think of civic engagement as going to vote when the time comes, going to the town hall meeting, serving on the Citizens Association or the Neighborhood Watch. That's what civic engagement meant for your parents and maybe your grandparents. It was a relatively structured thing, and that's what you did. If you were the president of the Citizens Association, you did that and only that. Today, young people are doing a wide range of things. They're on the Citizens Association, but they've started a social enterprise on the side. They are developing, one young man is developing school bags, and he gives a portion of the profits to community charities. We have young people who use their artistic gifts and so on to provide, what would you call it, therapy for those who have got, young people have gone through trauma, using using arts and edutainment and so on. These are the kinds of ways in which young people influence others, and they do it in small ways. I'm sure you probably never heard of some of these people. They're not the young people who sometimes get the National Youth Awards or are recognized at their school or their university, but they are doing it. But we don't see the results until way down the road, because those young women who participated in the therapy session with this young man using arts and drama are going to become better adjusted, more positive young women as they get older, and they are in turn going to have a better influence on their own children and so on. So one of the things we have to understand is that young people are influencing the world in a positive way. Sometimes we can talk about the negative in a little bit, and it's not mutually exclusive. Huh? You can have somebody doing something negative who's also doing something positive, which is what I mean about this sort of multi-dimensional contribution, because it's a part of this transition from young people are not always going to be young. You're young at a certain point, you make innovations, and your innovations change. Look at Norwell. Norwell started something when he was 13. He's still involved in that. But he has done so many other things. He's doing so many, making other contributions. It's not a young man that you can say is X, Y, and Z. He's X, Y, Z, A through Z. And starting on the numerals as well.
Let's hear from the young man then. Noel, I mean, it's being said about you, but what are you doing, and how do you see, just carrying on from what Terry-Ann was speaking about, how do you see it?
Yes, but first I want to say, I think Henry Charles is a young man too. I stand in his I like where Terry-Ann is going, actually. I would say too that the notion of what is negative and positive impacts is really situational, it's contextual. It depends on the space. It is space defined. I want to look a little bit at gangs, because I know we're gonna get to talking about that. A gang is a structure. It's a youth structure. It's a youth structure that in some communities is responsible for keeping peace and security. It depends on how you look at it. It's a structure that in some communities is responsible for ensuring that the young men are employed and they get work, and that they can give money to their families and their mothers. So the notion of structure depends really, and whether structures impact or influence the society or the space negatively or positively is really determined largely by whose interests they represent. Because even when we look at the situation of Afro-descendant groups, and we look at Afro-descendant people, and we talk about rap, and we talk about inner city youth, who is telling their story, as Dr. Roberts was saying? They're not telling their story. Certainly they're not telling their story on the big platforms. They're not telling their story at the UN General Assembly. Trayvon Martin is not there talking about his situation. Well, he's dead, but he was never invited there. But he was one of those young people. And the challenge is to interpret the notion of structures and its impact also within the context of the power relationships within the space, and from the point of view of the individual, the youth who is involved and who is affected. And how do we begin to turn structures and spaces into opportunities to move the society in a positive way, whether from a grassroots structure, a organizational structure, or a group of young people who form themselves into a little thing that they call some Western boys gang, you know. So I think we need to get there. In my own experience as a young person growing up, I found that it was very, very useful to be involved in structures, and that we need to recognize also that I'm glad Terry got there and Dr. Charles got there, well, Professor Charles got there, that there is such a thing as transience. And we talk about movements, and even in our own context here in Guyana, there is class transference, there's class transience, there is geographic interface between young people. We have moved away from the context of youth development and the context of a youth culture, which was spatial in that what happened was defined by the geographic constraints, and we've moved towards more temporal influences, that young people are connecting across other divides. They're connecting across geographic divides, connecting with technology, connecting with music, connecting with key ideas. And we have to bring those ideas and bring those influences, those now temporal influences, into our discourse about young people and how young people are shaping the world and what structures mean. And define structures not only within the geographic limitations or the class limitations of structure, but define structures also from the point of view of that broader gamut of the globalized youth, the youth who is now in the global economy, who is interacting in a temporal way.
So I want to take the opportunity. Now we are going to also welcome into our conversation. She had some technical difficulties. As you would have it, the truck, internet lines, these things apparently do not mix on the evening for VChat. Also don't lighten my my complexion apparently. But we are going to welcome into our conversation Miss Tioka Dove from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And Tioka is literally running in, and when I'm saying running in, she left one location, tried quite a few, and has now found somewhere where she can get a connection to come in. Tioka Dove she's also another young superstar. She is a winner of, she was a Chevening, is that Chevening? She's a Chevening scholar. She was a winner of the Queen's Young Leaders Awards, and we will be seeing a few other winners of the Queen's Young Leader Awards as we have future VChats discussing other topics, including youth development. We'll get back to that. But Tioka is one of those hard workers from Trinidad. I wasn't even sure where she was going to be broadcasting from, because last week we spoke and she said that she's in Trinidad, she was going to be in Guyana, and I believe she's in Trinidad now. Let's welcome Tioka Dove and give her a few minutes. Tioka, you have about 5 minutes just to share some of your thoughts on the topic.
And I came in a bit late, so I apologize, first of all, for that. Can I just get a gist of where we're at in the conversation? Are we generally talking youth development and volunteerism, or is there a different context that we are in now?
The conversation has taken a few different slants, and it's an interesting point. So we are speaking about such topics as the youth elite and the development of a movement, and even the accomplishments that young people have made, and some conversation about what are youth structures and youth organizations, and how do they. And I'm going to take from Terry Ann. I'm not going to say impact, but I'm going to say influence society and young people at that.
I think that's an interesting statement that you made. And speaking about youth regionalism, I'm in Guyana just last week. I was making a comment and telling them that as a region, we will never move forward or we will never truly develop unless we realize that we're one Caribbean. And as such, we need to work together in all our specific, in all spheres, and in how we strategize and how we bargain in the world, on the world stage. And I made a comment and I told them, divided we beg, united we bargain. But in the sphere of youth development, first and foremost, how impactful are youth structures? And I want to stress that we are many times or times over reinventing the wheel in youth development. Everybody wants to be a champion and everybody wants to say that they did something, and as such, we keep on, with limited resources in the region, we keep on reinventing the wheel and opening organizations that are similar to each other and that are all competing for the same funding, and most of them are doing the same things or slightly similar. And I think I would start by saying that it's time that we look at our reality in the region, what we're facing, the social issues that young people are facing, and we form a bond, we come together, we look at how we can partner instead of trying to achieve objectives on our own. And that is the first thing I would say as it pertains to impact. Yes, we can have an impact on our own. We are all passionate about our respective causes, and we may think that in our own organizations we have the human resource and the capacity and so forth, but there's one thing that's sure: resources are finite. And as such, I think moving forward and looking forward to advancing youth development in the region, we must look at, I call it theme clusters, if we want to say. So also in specific countries where certain NGOs or certain youth organizations, let me say on that level, are working or treating with specific issues. It is my view that these organizations should come together. It means more capacity, more people, and I'm not saying come together and lose your identity, but I'm saying partner on projects to have a greater impact, because right now, in many cases, we have a lot of passionate young people, a lot of young people that want to give back, that want to be a part, but there's a lack of resources that's keeping them back. It's frustrating them. It's making many disillusioned and disenchanted. And I think we're wasting time running on a wheel in many of our countries across the region, just trying and trying and trying, when we can put down the egos, put aside whatever politics there is in our separate organizations, that come together within our specific teams and within our specific clusters and really advance development in the region. I think that's where we need to focus. That's where our focus needs to be now, on unity through specific themes and our specific areas. That's my bit for now.
That's actually an excellent bit that you added. You know, it's interesting that aside from the fact that I'm not being broadcasted. I think it's an interesting bit here as well, because we have a very live discussion regarding. We have a very lively discussion regarding regional development and regional integration, and even in the movement we have formed the Caribbean Regional Youth Council. Um, and right, yeah, and yeah, okay, we just got that. It begs the question: how successful are we in these collaborations across the boundaries in the Caribbean region? And I saw Henry kind of raising up because, you know what, I saw a lot of work going on for that through the at the point the Commonwealth Youth Program Caribbean Center, and they had started that work towards the formation of what we have now as the Caribbean Regional Youth Council. And I'm sorry we don't have anyone here with us right now for them to also give some inputs. But of course, you know, we're going to have them in a future conversation. Henry, how do you see this collaboration really working? I'm talking about really working beyond just, you know, us wanting it to work, with the sharing of resources across. I think we have a couple of minutes.
I apologize. I'm here, guys. I'm here. Basically, what I'm saying is we need to look at a way, not even regionally as yet, but in our specific countries, we need to look at a way of like-minded, focused, mission-visioned youth organizations pooling resources, capacity, interests together and promoting doing similar projects, promoting partnership to carry projects forward. Because what I'm seeing on the ground, liaising with youth organizations and groups, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing a lot of passionate young people, a lot who are starting organizations, all starting organizations, and they do not have the capacity and method, one, for sustainability. They're just starting an organization out of passion. They don't have the capacity, the mentorship, the model for sustainability, and they continue struggling, and they spend more time struggling than they spend getting projects off the ground. And I'm seeing that we are wasting our greatest resource, which is our people, our youth, our generation, if we pool together. So, for instance, youth organizations working in HIV/AIDS, youth organizations working with at-risk and vulnerable youth.
Yeah. You know,
sorry about that, I was muted a minute. Youth organizations in all these different things, if we pool our resources together and we partner to execute projects, we're much better off than if we stay divided, all trying to reinvent the wheel, all trying to do different things, and we get nothing done, or we get little done. It is an issue. It's really, I'm seeing a lot of young people disillusioned. Give me one more.
All right, I like where Tioka is going. I want to still throw that to Henry, and I also want to get some feedback from Noel as well. Tioka, you say, just give you a few seconds.
Yeah.
Henry, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, but I am happy that Tioka has raised it, because it's a real issue and has to be addressed, to my mind, in many ways. Even when I was at the Commonwealth thing, I was actually coming from a background of activism, a background of being in the youth movement, not just parachuting in like a leader in a group, but actually doing the hard work of rolling up my sleeves, mobilize you around the country, that kind of thing. I have been involved in I've been exposed to the question of movements around the Caribbean. I've been exposed to the issues Noel raised of the struggles of people like Walter Rodney and all of those things. And in a way, those things guided me in terms of some of the movement. So that my involvement then, I saw the real need, and I had seen the impact of movement, of people, of multitudes of people, if you want to call it that, working with a purpose, okay? Working with a purpose. In fact, I remember keep making the point to my colleagues that if we can agree around a particular purpose, around a particular, you say, well, goal, objective, but these things, around some purpose. We agreed there. And we can accomplish that. After we accomplish that, we may go different ways, you know. Because if we use the experience of, let's use South Africa, the anti-apartheid movement, okay? A whole multitude of diverse forces came together to form the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, right? They accomplished the overthrow of the apartheid government. Subsequently, from ideological and other reasons, they went diverse ways, but they accomplished what they had united around. They accomplished it. I think that is the point that Tioka is making, and it brings back to a point earlier, I think, where when Noel spoke about the organization. I was reflecting recently that, look, when we start talking about organization and community, we have to talk about not just geographic spaces, we have to talk about issues. So you may have your people on the ground who are organized around issues, who are organized around interests, LGBT and whatever, you know, those various things. And we have to find what is the common purpose among all of those things, right? And how we go forward. It struck me, I was doing something in Belize 2 weeks ago. It's a youth group trying to get them pulled together, well, youth leaders and stakeholders, that our youth policies in our countries, and I may be raising the honestness here, I really suppose should have been that rallying point. It should have been that rallying point, that national framework around all of those different and divergent forces, interest groups should be rallying and accomplishing the thing that bring about the kind of unity. Obviously, something has been amiss and the policies have not done that. But I believe that we have a responsibility. Those of us who appreciate that gap, we have a responsibility to see how best, even though it is by, what they call it, by group, how best we can begin to pull together the diverse youth players, youth interests, whatever, around a certain theme, around a certain purpose. And it's for us to be able to define what is that purpose. And I believe, quite apart from the presentations next month at the conference in Jamaica, I think we need to have, at some point, I know Terran was talking about it, at some point, for us to have a tete-a-tete among some of the persons that are there, some of the persons, the influencers, the activists, the youth groups, the youth leaders that are there, and say, hello, how do we go forward in terms of recognizing the shortcut? Another thing that we have to, I don't know how much we could influence it, another thing that is, we have to be careful how it's working. I have come to the realization that those United Nations agencies are allies. They can be of a greater assistance. But we have to be careful. I suspect we have to know how we engage with them, because I think they could also contribute to retarding our progress. Essentially, we find ourselves running to the bell of the UN agency so that a UN group want to organize this event in Barbados, Terrian, evidence-based approaches to youth policy. It is good. We want that. We want it, yes. But they took the initiative from outside and they came with that. So we all abandoned all what we were doing and we went there. We shared our ideas. We did certain things. Right? Now, we have come back to our spaces. And I don't know that, well, some of us might have do something, but I don't know that there's been a regional frame going forward. I am beginning to get a little wary, and I'm beginning to the thing of where it may be necessary now, because we don't have the framework. But we have to come to a point post 2015 in the Caribbean where we determine our agenda. And if our agenda coincides with or is to be supported by the UNDP and whatever, we call them in to provide the technical and thing support. So when they come in, we have an agenda that is from now, that goes from, say, just being troublesome. That starts from Kingston, that going to maybe where? Which is for Westmoreland, right? The UNDP, we want your assistance to take us from Kingston to Mobe. You know what I'm saying to you? And then we going further. But not as it is now. We abandon Tioka, abandon what she's doing, and run to the workshop in Barbados that was about, what was it, Tioka? Advancing youth policy in the OACS in Barbados. What has happened since then? I thought when we came out of that, agreeing that there should be advancing, supporting youth policies, that there was some technical support, some resources coming to help these countries. Nothing has happened. So we keep, and the thing is, with all due respect to our colleagues in those organizations, we have to recognize that those colleagues are not in the bracket of influencers.
Now we have another comment to come in as well.
Technocrats. So some of those things, but I think we need to just to define. We need to agree and clearly define what I refer to, for want of a better phrase, a strategic framework.
Yes.
A strategic framework that, even though it sets between 2015 and 2020, these are 3 or 4 things that we're going to do in terms of advancing the youth development environment in the Caribbean. Okay? And then each of the streams. So you have the persons like Tioka and them, the social entrepreneurs, the young activists and them, who fill in a stream. You have the established organizations that fill in a stream. You have VCTT. You know what I'm saying? But we agree on what is our thing. And the thing is, CARICOM cannot do it for us. None of those institutions cannot do it for us, because those institutions, if I use the Bible, you cannot serve 2 masters. So the youth development fraternity have to see those institutions as allies, as partners to a certain thing. But we have to set our agenda. What is our strategic framework, priority in the region? And we're working towards it as young people, youth development practitioners, the youth movement, so to speak, with the support of those partners like CARICOM, the governments, the UN, whoever else may want to come on board. Sorry for being so long.
That's all right. I know Terry wanted to get in, and Tioka seeing Noel chime in. Guys, the floor is open, Terry Ann, but I know you had something to say earlier.
Yeah, well, you know, Henry covered a lot of what I was going to mention as he continued. I was picking up on what Tioka was talking about, which really struck at the heart of what Noel, Henry, and I had already discussed about this idea of the movement. This idea of having a common objective, which Henry now expanded on a little bit there. However, I would also like to say that one of the ways in which we do this, in other words, try to initiate a movement, is by allowing everyone to see themselves in the movement. And this is where I caution us to be careful. When we sometimes speak about starting a movement, taking from Noel's point about power, let's not forget that there are power dynamics even within our youth fraternity. And so when we say youth movement, what I really mean is that it's my objective that you must come on board with. Right? 50-50 Youth is doing X, we're having a conference, I want you to come, not so much to share your views about your reality, what's happening and your ideas, but I want you to sign off on something I have already prepared, right? We've all had that experience attending these youth meetings, only to find out that the communique was actually written perhaps 2 weeks before we even arrived at the venue. So we've had those experiences before. But we have to remember, when we started this discussion and we talked about who young people are and how they contribute, we got a little bit, I think, from Norwell, who shared his experience and so on, a little bit, but we didn't expand on it, on why young people contribute or why young people choose to participate or not to participate. That's at the crux of it. Often when we seek to engage in any way, whether in volunteerism or whatever it is we do, there's a passion. There's something that drives me to do this, which is partly responsible, in my view, based on what I've seen, of this proliferation of new organizations. In other words, in and of themselves, these new organizations are not bad. They represent an innovativeness, a willingness to move forward. Of course, what happens is the competition, as Tioka rightly said, there's this competition over resources and so on. But if we change our mindsets to understand that achieving an objective begins with us putting in what we already have, before we get to the stage of trying to mobilize additional resources, which are usually the financial. That's usually what we're competing with each other about.
Yeah.
But we have human resources. And the point is, before we get into these organized, or more, I wouldn't say organized, I would say more formal structures, we've all been doing what we were doing. So let me just give a simple example. If our objective was to ensure that every secondary school student in the Caribbean had homework support, you have a myriad of young people, youth organizations, organizations run by more mature persons and so on, offering those services, and everybody is content to do what they do. Sometimes people don't have any financing for their program, they just give up their time. They sometimes give up their own resources. But once, if I now came up at the conference and we discussed this, I said, what's our agenda? I said, oh, we need to have a Caribbean Association of Homework Programs. All of a sudden, the discussion turns to who's going to be the president, who's going to be the treasurer, who's going to approach this UN agency or this donor for the money. What happened to the original passion that we had for what it is that we do and how we make a difference? This is not to minimize the challenges of financial resources. I know them very well. But if we begin to change our own mindset, because part of what I'm saying here is the pot can't call the kettle black, as we say in Jamaica, right? You sometimes have to look at yourself before you start pointing fingers, or take the plank out of your eye before you point at the speck of dust and so on. Some of us in the youth fraternity are ourselves guilty of doing this. I don't think out of any great malevolence, but it's a modus operandi for us. We all want to survive. We all want to be seen making a contribution, and we sometimes, in the rat race of doing what we do, trying to meet the many needs that are out there, we forget our first love, that first passion that got us to the point that said, I want to be a part of this. When I became a CARICOM Youth Ambassador, the issue for me was really about how can I begin to encourage other young people, wherever they are in the Caribbean region, to achieve their goals and achieve their dreams. That's what I wanted. That was my passion. And something I've taken with me throughout my career as an academic and so on. But I'm sure along the way, I've been more concerned about how am I going to get this grant for this research project, or how am I going to do that and so on. But if we all focus on our first love for youth development, that first passion, I think that movement that Henry, Norwell, Tioka are speaking about is possible. But it starts up here in our mind and in our hearts.
We haven't heard from
I do want to jump in.
Yeah, but before you speak, Noel, I just want to say, for those who are listening in, please feel free to share your comments and questions online. You use any hashtag VChat on Twitter. For those of you all who may not be using Twitter, you can also use the VCTT Facebook page. And I saw a question that came in earlier. I think that it was already answered from Olston. Regarding how professional young people who are professionals can get involved. I think Terry-Ann just took that question on pretty well just now. So let's hand over to Noel.
Well, first, I just want to say that there's a reason why I love Jamaica and why I love Jamaican women.
Oh my goodness.
Terry-Ann was wonderful. Just wonderful. She said what I wanted to say so eloquently, so beautifully. The challenge, and I hear where Tioka was coming from, and oftentimes we speak of partnerships, and partnerships are good, but I think that the question is, how do we move ourselves to talk more about solidarity, organizing ourselves for the grant and so on. Sure, that is the modus operandi, but also organizing ourselves around the issues and around the interests, around our self-interest, and defining our self-interest in a way that connects to our condition and the condition of the people around us. Also, I think, you know, the phrases that we use here for the things that Terry Ann is talking about, and I want to say now, very good, Dr. Roberts is talking about, those issues of self-reliance. How do we move the conversation to a discourse about self-reliance? How do we move to a conversation about self-emancipation? How do we move to a conversation about individual responsibility, individual power? Now, the challenge, and so I don't want to repeat what Dr. Roberts said, the challenge is that we have to recognize that organizations are by their nature self-interested. Organizations seek their own preservation. And this is how organizations become sometimes anti-people. Because the organization, like the state, becomes responsive to its own interests. That you have to put police on the streets to keep young black boys in check, because young black boys are rapping about the atrocities in their communities. Young black boys are saying that you are harassing us when we are taking a little and you are taking enough at the top. So when we look at the dynamics of power and interest and the interplay between the organization and the individual, we must construct the discourse around how do we move people to volunteer, but really volunteerism, and for me as an individual, as a young person, volunteering was really an act of self-expression. It was an expression of my own concern, my own values, my own interests, my own ideas, my own worldview. It was about how do I shape the space in which I live? How do I shape the people around me? How do I interact? How do I begin to solve problems? That was the notion of volunteerism. And therefore, we have to ensure that that conversation about working together doesn't get to be a conversation bogged down by really recreating structures that are not in the interest of our societies, considering that, as our Professor Clive Thomas has said, our Caribbean societies have been the prototype of capitalism. They have been constructed to preserve a capitalist interest, and they will continue to perpetuate capitalist interests unless we do, as Dr. Roberts says, we reshape the very way we think on problems and solution to problems.
I
Well
almost
said.
cry
Well said,
as I'm listening to some of the words that are being shared. And, you know, I think I'll give way to Terry Ann, but in the room here, it's almost a chorus. I feel almost as though I'm in church here, just hearing, amen, yeah, that's right, from the VCTT team. So I don't think I should say very much more. Terry Ann, please, back off to you.
I don't really have anything to say. I was just concurring with what Noel said. I just wanted to raise maybe another issue. I don't recall whether it was Tioka or Norwell or Henry who had raised something earlier about the movement and what's happening now with IT and the internet and so on, and the way in which now we have trans-border movements and so on. And I just wanted to raise a couple points about that in terms of, I think the internet and the various platforms, including social media and so on, are great tools to help us to facilitate this movement that we want, especially if we want a regional one, like Tioka envisages for us and so on, which is really positive. It gives young people exposure to people from different places, different backgrounds. You can connect in real time. It also provides an opportunity to mobilize more quickly around trans-border issues. But there are also some challenges that emerge in terms of, I know that somebody had posed a question, Maurice, about the extent to which these online movements will, in effect, replace the traditional youth organization. No, I don't think so. But I think that there is a risk that there will be greater exclusion of some communities. Bear in mind that things like internet penetration rates are still low in some parts of our region. If we look at the Global Competitiveness Report, you can have a look at the figures for countries like Suriname, Guyana, and Haiti, and so on, and have a look at the penetration rates there to get a sense of who might be excluded when we move to these sort of exclusively online type movements or online driven movements. But there's also, I think, the risk of losing the human touch. For many of us, when we started as volunteers, that passion, that interest began maybe because of a personal interaction with somebody. Whether it was somebody like me who I connected with and I said, hey, we can do something together, whether it was somebody that I considered to be less fortunate than myself, there was that personal connection. And sometimes I think as we, I am, what do you say, transitioning, we said, Norwell, out of the youth cohort. But for those who are younger than me, would be considered digital natives. The world in which they live is one in which you're constantly glued to the devices, you're constantly glued to the virtual world. And virtual volunteerism and virtual advocacy is so important. It plays such an important role, but it cannot supplant the original connection, people-to-people connection of young people meeting, sometimes not only for the common, I would say, developmental objective, but there are other common objectives that young people have in terms of creating movements and connecting and volunteering. It could be merely a social one. For a lot of young people, depending on their developmental stage, they just need to be able to be in a space where they can hang out with other people, they can meet other young people. That too is important, and we can't discount some of those social imperatives that young people have. You have the professional imperatives of wanting to improve myself and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know that I've heard people speak about before the need to just move to these virtual movements as if it would somehow replace the traditional. And I don't think that that can happen, or we should never certainly allow that to happen. So I just wanted to make that point.
All right. And I just want to chip in and state that the thinking, or what I am advancing, is that for far too long in specific fields, I'm not saying that we're going to get a regional youth development movement in 1 year or in 2 years or in 3 years. No, we're selling ourselves dreams if that's what we're saying. What I'm saying is, in our respective countries, in Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Guyana, Bahamas, Barbados, going down the road, we need to come together in specific themes. So for instance, all NGOs or all youth organizations dealing with youth development, I'm not saying to lose your identity, but I'm saying because our resources in the region are finite, we must partner together in executing programs. That's the only way we're going to grow stronger. We're going to have more research. That's something we're failing at in the region. Everybody wants to execute a project. Nobody wants evidence from that project. You hand in a report to your funders and then that's it. So I'm saying it's time nationally. We can look to towards a regional agenda when we're at the conference in Jamaica. We can look towards all those things. But I'm saying nationally in each of our countries, we need to survive and for youth development to truly prosper and take off because of limited resources. Look at Trinidad and Tobago. Last year we were making $116 a barrel on oil. This year we're making $42. Everybody has to make changes and to their approach. So will, and more so will, civil society and the NGO sector. So what is going to happen if we remain by ourselves, in our silos? We are not going to advance anything. We may execute one project, but we may not have the capacity to afford research, or we may not have the capacity to afford another element of the project. Why not? And I think the fear in coming together, many organizations have, is that they are going to lose their identity, somebody else is going to get the praise, and in the meantime, young people in our region are crying and dying. It's simple. I don't know if it comes across as bold-faced, but I'm saying that it's a matter of putting our egos and ourselves and our organizations to the background and putting our purpose and our vision at the core in advancing our work, right? Because we're not going to go anywhere, people. We're going to all be going to conferences. Those who get the opportunity, we're going to talk in conferences, have long conversations, and after the conference, there's no outcome because there's no money. We're all going to have different an exercise here, an exercise there, and there will be no research coming, well, no or little research coming out of most of our programs because we don't have the capacity. Partnership is the only way we can move forward in our respective countries as it relates to youth development. It is the only way I see us moving forward with this economy, with the most of the funding. If you look at the funding agencies that give, you would realize that funding has really dried up in the region in the last five years, and it's now diverted to conflict zones. That is going to remain. Right? That is going to remain and it's going to expand for the next 5 to 10 years to come. And unless we don't make ourselves, one, united, and two, in our respective ways, look to a model for most of our organizations, a model of social entrepreneurship that is finding or using our greatest resource, which is ourselves, to make an income for our organization as well, then we will not survive. And that is the honest truth. We can talk about we can have the greatest plans, but without unity, without human resource, capital, capacity, and without pooling our resources together, we aren't going anywhere. And that is just me sitting down as a young person, reflecting and asking myself, what of youth development and youth in our respective countries and in the region 5, 10 years from now, if we remain like this?
I want to take the opportunity at exactly where you're going, Tioka, and I like the points because one of the challenges that I see very often is that young people and youth organizations have another issue of confidence. I mean, so I want to do this research, but I can't just go approach this big man and say, help me, and what do I say? What are the right words to say? I've actually been through an experience where I asked someone to write a letter. He literally laid out for me what should have gone into a letter. When I asked him, can you write it for me? It took a week. And, you know, regular junctures, I asked him, is there an issue? Do you need help? And he kept saying no, but at the end of the process, he gave me his excellent letter and I asked him, so how come, you know, why didn't you write this for me at the point? And he said, to be honest, I wrote it probably in 20 minutes after you asked. But the issue was I wasn't confident in myself that this letter would have been at the standard that you wanted. I was about 21 or 22 years old in a club in my community, and it was a letter asking for some sponsorship. I myself didn't know what to write. He taught me how to do sponsorship letters, but he wasn't confident. It's happening to the extent that a friend of mine who's a former CARICOM Youth Ambassador, Prunella Mungru, has formed an organization she calls the Jacob Jacket Foundation for Enlightenment and Education, Empowerment and Enlightenment. And it's because we have this big issue among young people of lacking that confidence. And I want to take the opportunity just to highlight two things. Forgive me if it sounds like a plug for VCTT, but it's actually my own opportunity to see persons who are younger than I am push beyond that. So I joined this organization, VCTT, about a year ago, with a president who was about 26, 27 years old, estimating, Giselle Mendez. And just a couple months ago, we launched something that we called it was our meet and greet. We call it Experience VCTT. And I saw these young people, majority of them under 25 years old, pulling large organizations in Trinidad and Tobago, like the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, which is a department of our Office of the Prime Minister. And they got REACT and Red Cross and started pulling these organizations, even getting the Chief Disaster Coordinating Officer at our Ministry of Local Government to come on board and say, we're going to come together and collaborate to speak about disaster management and preparedness, and emergency and disaster management and preparedness. I hope I have it right because I know someone is watching who's going to correct me after. But they dared to do it. And I know it's not as simple as saying it. But the other example that I want to draw, which is actually with someone here, when Giselle told me that, you know, we wanted to do this and that, I would always say, Giselle, we need to do research. We need to do research. Of course, I'm not a researcher. I'm now getting into research myself. Sometime later, Giselle comes to me and says, okay, Maurice, so we have just negotiated, she speaks like that, we have just negotiated with Salizes at UWI. I met this amazing lady. Her name is Terry-Ann Gilbert Roberts, and we're going to be doing research with UWI. Hopefully, we're going to be talking with them, and I'd like you to come along. She said she knew you. How come you didn't mention it to me? And I guess...
We're not hearing you, Maurice.
Sorry? I guess I myself may have lost a bit of confidence, but I think that's an important thing for us. And even in pulling this together, I'll tell you what, I was having a conversation with a gentleman who calls himself a handsome guy. I can't really say that he is, Darren Dory. He's the webmaster at the UWI St. Augustine campus. Just talking about the fact that we needed to have a new location to broadcast VChat from. And we ended up in this really lovely and comfortable boardroom at the UWI in Campus IT Services. We're here after 8 at night broadcasting VChat. I take the opportunity to say thank you, Darren. Thank you, Campus IT. Thank you once more, the UWI. Or even approaching people such as Henry Charles, who is an international youth hero. You go on his Facebook page and you see people from Africa saying thank you, or he's debating about something in somewhere in Africa and then debating something in Europe. And I'm wondering, you know, how do you keep all this information inside of that head? Or I go to Terry-Ann, I'm feeling good I get to call her Terry-Ann. I'll call her Dr. Gilbert Roberts if I see her in the street though. And this lady is writing books and she's the head of this research cluster with these group of other amazing people. And she's agreed to come in and VChat, or sending out a message to the Guyana National Youth Council or to Tioka Dove. And just so you know, the GNYC, one of the reasons why we felt that we had to have them was because they ran a campaign earlier this year called Vote Like a Boss, where they pulled their youth resources together and began to encourage young people not only that you can vote, that you can vote confidently. Whichever direction you go, you should be able to come out and feel comfortable and exercise your civic duty and vote for a government in your country. Or even Tioka, if you look at her in Trinidad, you can see that she is one young person who's doing her part. She is speaking with and for young people. She is working among young people. I saw one guy say, you know, he felt as though she was so down to earth and it was so comfortable to speak with her. I want to encourage all of our young viewers and all of our older viewers that, you know what, there's nothing that can stop you from going where you want to go. Our title was Youth Affecting You, how youth structures impact your world. I'll take Terry-Ann's input, how youth structures influence your world. We went through a lot of different things here, and there's so many different ways we can see the influence. But rather than trying to wrap it up myself, I have the voices of some very attractive, very intelligent people. I also have Noel and Henry who are also intelligent. I can't say if they're attractive. Guys, I'm sorry. But I'd like to ask them to give a few final remarks, probably about 30 seconds. Well, 30 seconds is ridiculous. About a minute of closing remarks before we wind things down. So let's go from where, actually let's start from a young and go to the older or the less young. So we'll start with Noel. Closing remarks.
Actually, I think I might be a little older than Tioka. I'm not sure. Tioka was just in Guyana and I missed an opportunity to meet her and maybe take a beer or two. But I hope I'll get that opportunity in Trinidad and Tobago. I, in closing, would only say that thanks, one, for the opportunity. I think it was a very, wow, it was powerful, this conversation. And we need to have more conversations like this. To your audience who they're looking at this and it's going to be, I think, recorded and kept on YouTube, I hope it's also something that they can use in their own work and that it gives some ideas. I think that there are many paths to where we want to go, but all of it revolves around ideas. And platforms where we can share ideas are always important, regardless of where those ideas come from. That ideas are themselves, by their nature, enriching, and I welcome that. And I hope that we have more of those conversations, more of those opportunities to share ideas, and just to remind young people that the power is with you already, that you already have the power, and we need to use that power creatively, innovatively in our communities and in the region.
Okay, so let's go over to Tioka. Tioka, let's see if we get your audio. Okay, so while we're working things out with Tioka, let's go to Terian, and we'll come back to you, Tioka, while we get this worked out, all right?
Okay, well, thanks everyone for this really rich discussion. I just want to say that as a start, we are committed at 50/50 Youth coming out of this discussion to tell some of those stories that we spoke about how young people participate, how they engage, and also to help to document your ideas about your visions of this movement that you have, this world that you want to promulgate and so on. That we are here as researchers to help you to do that. We very much take Tioka's advice on partnership and also Norwell's advice on building solidarity in the youth movement. And I just want to say that that's what we are all about at 50/50 Youth. And so we want to begin to help you to document that and tell those stories. So please do reach out to us, and we'll be happy to engage with you more. Thanks very much.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, Tioka, go ahead.
Wonderful. So I just want to end on two notes. I think I didn't stress this in my first statement because it was a bit off, but I want to stress to persons that we can never, respective societies can never advance until our most at-risk and vulnerable groups, more so youth and women, advance as well. And in saying that, I urge all that no matter your time or how busy you think you are, at vulnerable groups at risk means society at risk, and as such they are our priority. It should be not just volunteers, those passionate, it should be a national priority, and of every citizen that you give back and that you volunteer, because our politicians, no matter how big or how small a cabinet, they cannot do it alone. They can set policies in place, they can do all these different things, but they cannot physically do it alone. We need to start to look out one for another in advancing our respective communities, and by that way advancing our respective nations and our region on a whole. So that's my just stressing my aspect of volunteerism. And I hope another time we can talk about the merits of volunteerism to really inspire others to volunteer. As it relates to youth development moving forward, I think it is imperative that we understand and as Terian is there and she just spoke and gave us support as a researcher, I think it is important that when we execute youth programs that they be evidenced or research based. We need to start building our research bank as it relates to youth intervention, youth development programs and so forth. Otherwise everybody is just going to be recreating the wheel and wasting time. And as such, it is important as we face similar issues within the region that in doing projects it's research and evidence based, so that it can you can build a model easily and replicate and get things done faster. Better use, efficient use of resources, time, all of these different things. So that's just my bit in stressing that, and I really look forward to youth development being inclusive and collaborative moving forward. And the days of us going to conferences and going all over the place, coming back with no income, no commitment to funding, and no clear strategic plan to move forward. I really hope that those days are over. And in order for those days to be over, we need to start to demand and strategize and put forward a stance. Yeah? So I thank you all for having me. Thank you.
I'm almost afraid to say it, but I have to make the joke because we're going to be heading off to a conference in Jamaica for the Caribbean Youth Development Conference at Terry, and I hope you have some financiers who are all, you know, lined up and ready for us. I am definitely going to be having conversations with them for the work that
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's do this. Okay, and of course we have Monsieur Charles, mon ami Lucien. Was that correct? I'm still learning my Creole, but Mr. Charles, for your closing remarks.
C'est un bon plaisir pour moi de participer à la discussion là. Qui parle about jeunesse caribéenne, qui ça qu'a fait depuis jeunesse, c'est moi merci vous, monsieur beaucoup merci tout ce monde là qui est ici. What I was saying is that I just want to thank you all. It was a pleasure for me to participate in the conference and to kind of, in my own way, encapsulate some of what Terry, the three of my colleagues before me have said in going forward. Youth development must not be seen only for the purpose of youth development, if you get me. Youth development is not the end. The process of youth development should be a tool in our context in the Caribbean to restart, re-energize the independence movement, which has gone awry. Somewhere along the line, our noble independence movement that was started by Nathaniel Critchlow and others in the 1990s coming forward and then taken on by the others, the Michael Manleys and the others and the Morris Bishops and whoever, the Eric Williams and them going forward, it has been put on pause. Our youth development should have that broader purpose. So we actually building young people capacity, engaging and mobilizing young people for that broader purpose of re-energizing and refocusing the independence and integration movements of the Caribbean. So that we have challenges, but there are many opportunities like Tioka, I think, has identified. And I think it is for us, going back to Noel, to build that solidarity. That solidarity should even precede the partnership, so that we know when we enter into the more technical aspects of partnership, we are going there with a purpose. And the purpose, yes, the purpose, we may end up doing certain things in different ways, but the broader purpose is about transforming the spaces, the Caribbean spaces, the spaces where we exist, the spaces where we interact, and it is about ensuring that as a Caribbean people, inclusive of all of the minorities and all of the challenged persons and the persons who have been socially excluded, are playing a role and are living in a better environment, a better space where people are more in touch with what is their historical responsibility. One love and thank you all.
Wow. I feel kind of bad to be the guy who has to bring this discussion to an end this evening. Because, you know, I'll tell you what, going from an idea to actually executing requires a lot of stress and a lot of work. But there were a lot of different people and organizations that did background work, and I really have to, before I even give my closing remarks, I think it's more important to show that gratitude and to say thank you. When I came up with the idea of doing VChat surrounding International Youth Day, I had touched base with the UN Population Fund in Trinidad and Tobago, and they gave me a resounding yes that they would support. And I know that there was an issue why we were supposed to have had some inputs as well from UNFPA Trinidad and Tobago's office. But I must say thank you to UNFPA to UWI, Salises, and 50/50 Youth Research Action Partnership. I can't say that it's far from me seeing the research, seeing the action, and definitely at the VCTT seeing that partnership. Terry Ann was invaluable resource to the conversation and the discussion this evening. But going back again at the UWI, I have to keep saying it. Yui has rescued me for this. Yui really rescued us, I'll tell you what. Because I should also say Henry, Mr. Charles is also a part of 50/50 Youth and is also a researcher at Salises in the 50/50 Youth Research Cluster. But a gentleman by the name of Darren Dore, webmaster at UWI St. Augustine, in a conversation yesterday afternoon, throwing out something, left field. Do you think you can help in about 5 minutes in the conversation? We didn't only have we had a possibility of some equipment to be used as well. And this evening he went beyond the call. He even went as far as getting a light bulb for us to try to get our lighting up. For those of you who see me, the lighting didn't come up because of something that we had with our lights. But he got us snacks. We hear all the bad about the UWI, but people don't really tell those stories. I think those stories are very important to be told. There's a gentleman by the name of Captain Randall Roberts from the Trinidad and Tobago Cadet Force. He's actually my reporting officer. He's the public affairs officer of the Cadet Force, but he is also the director of a company called Caribbean Sites. We placed a call to him last Monday or something like that, and I said, sir, I need a website that I think I want to be able to recognize the standard and the quality of the people that I'm getting. When I started reading up about the people who we had proposed to come in, I said, you know what, we can't just do this just on a YouTube link. I want to show who, the strength of who they are. That's all I had to say. And we had this beautiful site. If you take a look at it at vctt.org/vchat, it was beautiful work done, and I had almost nothing to do. Guyana National Youth Council as well, to Tiffany. I sent an email, but I then sent a Facebook message, and in no time she said, all right, I'm not sure if I can be there, but GNYC must be there. And she eventually, about a couple days later, would have made recommendation, and I think it was succinct, and it did it for me. I am not going to be there. It's not an executive member, but you don't need one if we have Mr. Noel Hines. That kind of input, I feel, is important because as organizations, we must understand that when we represent people, our role is to represent them. So they present to us, and sometimes we present them. In this opportunity, she got the chance to give him a chance to present on behalf of the organization. I think that's the best way a National Youth Council should operate. We were supposed to have had someone from the Suriname Youth Parliament, and they had some technical difficulties, couldn't come in. We also had someone who was supposed to have come in from the Two Cents movement in Trinidad and Tobago, but they had an emergency today, and they're doing some excellent work. They right now have some spoken word artists in Trinidad from the US. We got some assistance from WI Youth, and I think an article should be written in Wisdom Stewart newspaper about the event. These are some of our partners, but also inside of it is one other young person I want to mention. I'm not going to call the names from VCTT, but a gentleman by the name of Lasady Till. Now, Lasady is in Texas, and they have a storm that's going on right now, so he was disconnected from moderating with us today, and also had issues with being able to bring our presenters together. But Lasady stayed.
He's in Georgia.
Pardon me?
He's in Georgia, he says, but it's close enough. He says he just no messages in Georgia.
But, once I USA, I kind of get lost in. Up to a couple of years ago, everywhere was New York, so I've come very far. But I have to say thank you to these people, and beyond saying thank you, I want to use this as an opportunity to signal what happened to make this happen, and what is going to happen for us to be able to continue these VChats. It wasn't the work of an organization. As much as VCTT may have been a convener, I'm now feeling as though this isn't even a VCTT product as much as it is a product of a number of people and places around the Caribbean region. I mean, knowing that Tioka would have run up and down trying to find a place to be here, it signals the importance of us collaborating. And may I say it, that's the purpose that we have been called together at the Volunteer Center, for the collaboration of volunteers and non-profit organizations and organizations that use volunteers, to be able to strengthen that concept of service in the Caribbean region. I want to pull a couple of things from the discussion as we close. The need for collaboration and shared resources. Beyond the falling oil prices in Trinidad and Tobago, we've had that challenge with a severe lack of resources across non-profits worldwide, but also in small island developing states, as we are in the Caribbean. Even Guyana, it's not an island, but it is a developing country, and they have their own economic challenges. We must begin to work together. We got comments like the importance of ideas themselves and documenting youth stories and being able to represent and promote the vulnerable in society. I like that quote from Tioka, vulnerable groups at risk means society at risk. I want to take the opportunity as we're closing to say that Terrian had asked me if we'd be willing to repeat VChat, and I think that it's probably going to be a unanimous decision among VCTT staff, and I'm sure among our presenters, that this must continue. But I also want to point you in the direction of the Caribbean Youth Development Conference as an excellent opportunity not only to continue these conversations, but to advance those conversations. It's happening in Jamaica in between September. Terrian, can you just give me that as we close?
Yes, the 30th of September to the 2nd of October. Link us on Facebook, facebook.com, Salisa's 5050 Youth, to get updates. And we should be sharing information shortly for those who can't make it to Kingston, for you to be able to participate virtually through a stream. So look out for that information.
All right, and one last thing I think I felt I should say. Even though she didn't mention it, one of our presenters, Tioka Dove, is also launching her own foundation, the Tioka Dove Legacy Foundation. She's looking at me funny in the stream. You guys on stream are not seeing it.
I already launched my foundation. Let me just correct you. The certain arms of the foundation is not up as yet, but I have already launched my foundation, and we are starting our first evidence-based social intervention later this year. And following that, I am going into aquaponics farming, where I will be mentoring young at-risk youth, but also they would become qualified in aquaponics and farming and so forth. So I have dedicated some of my resources and land towards aquaponics farming, and then I would be doing another project in the food industry. I already have a catering company, so I'm turning that into a social enterprise where we will solely be hiring at-risk and vulnerable women, and as such, we are providing jobs for them, but we're also training them to become patisserie chefs, and they then leave with a CVQ certificate. So it's a lot of partnership. I'm still putting a lot of things in place for that, and that's going to start. My company is presently running, but that new social aspect of it is going to start later this year, and the farm is going to start in January, because I still have to put a lot of things together. I'm now formulating my board of directors. Mr. Charles is on there, Giselle Mendez is on there, partnership again, and we're doing all of that. But I must stress, you know, in looking at organizations and so forth, we must, if it's one thing I asked myself earlier this year, I said, you're not just going to do another organization, you know, how are you going to become donor independent and social entrepreneurship on commodity services that are in demand and in need, is where we go and as such, I push farming and aquaponics. So that is what it is. Thank you for calling me out, Maurice. I don't like to talk much about um, myself. For one of people to say that I am self-aggrandizing and do different things. But thank you for calling that out and allowing me the opportunity to share about what I'm working on. So yeah, so for the next few months, I'm starting up the evidence-based social intervention, particularly seeking to create a model of how to treat with at-risk and vulnerable youth. So we're doing an intervention with a specific group of young women at a juvenile institution, and then from there we're building a model. It's already a model that a team from the US, they use in a number of continents across the world, a number of countries across the world, mostly conflict zones. So I'm trying to then implement that model in a Caribbean perspective to see how it works, tweak it, that kind of thing. And then we finalize after working with these young women and testing the model for 6 months, finally in the end put forward a research and findings, but more so a model of how to treat with at-risk and vulnerable youth, so that we can train persons that deal with them and how to best treat with them, because we've been failing our youth at juvenile institutions. Yeah, so that's basically what I'm doing now.
I think what that is signaling to me as well, and I wanna call out Noel for this one, because Noel said that he had hosted some similar online discussions. Noel, is an opportunity for us to start discussing, because one thing I think we can do for a forum like this is give an opportunity to the rank and file youth and other community and non-profit organizations to speak about the work that they're doing. You don't need the traditional media to do it, and they do it at times, but I guess we are now seeing an opportunity that we can begin to share and tell the stories that aren't being told. Well, of course, we've gone a little bit over time, but I think I enjoyed every single moment of our conversation this evening. I want to end off with, can I use this slogan from Volunteer Center? Volunteer today, change tomorrow. That volunteering doesn't necessarily need to be the traditional concept of working with no pay, but it is, in my humble opinion, one of the things that in society that we cannot work without. Sometimes it means just presenting yourself, because you never know what you're going to get in return. I want to encourage you all to present yourselves, but also to continue the conversation about where our youth organizations, where our young people are going, and what do we really need to do to develop in moving forward towards the now strategic development goals of the United Nations and our visions in our respective nations and our goals for development in so many different areas. I want to thank you all for being here and for contributing.
Thank you for having us.
All the persons who came in on the live stream. I saw CYM, Trinidad and Tobago. I saw Leo's groups from District 60A, Trini Lissa B, Olston, Renee. I don't want to call all the names because I'm going to get into trouble, but each and every one of you, thank you so very much. And I'm sorry I can't play any nice celebratory music as we end, but have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you all at our next VChat. Just a little hint, we believe it'll be in September. Have a great evening, and thank you everyone for being here.
Bye everyone, have a good night.
Bye, and see you all in Jamaica.
Jamaica next.
Yes, see you all in Jamaica.
Okay, bye-bye.
I've booked and my bag is packed.
Ah,
Right.